name is Jennifer Yoshimura, and I am an advisor and project manager here at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, PNNL. I am excited to have three amazing leaders and participants in our Energy Storage for Social Equity program as part of our panel today. We have Abel Thompson, an organizer for Together New Orleans, Marie Kills Warrior, an energy research and project developer at Honor the Earth and Eighth Fire Solar, and Victoria Flowers, an environmental scientist and compliance coordinator for Oneida Nation. You'll hear from these leaders firsthand their community goals, projects that they're working on, as well as needs and experiences and partnerships to help further achieving their community goals. To start us off, I'm going to be sharing a brief overview of the program for those that are not familiar with ES4SE, and then turn it over to Abel, Marie, and Victoria. So with that, ES4SE is sponsored by the Department of Energy, Office of Electricity, and we're very thankful for the support and leadership from our sponsor, Dr. Emra Juk. ES4SE was imagined and created in 2021 by some amazing leaders that are hopefully on this call today, Rebecca O'Neill and Crystal Pruitt, as well as other leaders from both Pacific Northwest National Lab and Sandia National Labs in the creation of this program. The program focuses on 4 justice tenets: recognition justice, procedural justice, distributive justice, and restorative justice. As we look at these 4 tenets in conjunction with energy storage, which provides flexibility in location as well as addressing diverse and wide applications, considering social benefits and community goals, accessibility, affordability, environmental impact, along with social impact and decarbonization goals and resiliency goals, were also looked at as part of the program. Resiliency is often focused around grid resiliency, and we try to incorporate a focus in addition to just grid and energy resiliency, but include community resiliency as well. The program is comprised of 2 phases. Carly, I may ask you to jump to the next slide, please. Thanks. The program is comprised of 2 phases. The first phase, technical assistance, included the recruitment and selection process that PNNL led. Phase 2 is led by our partnering labs, Sandia National Labs, and they're leading the project development and deployment assistance phase. And we're currently right in that transition between technical assistance and PDDA. There are unique distinctions within ES4SE and highlighting, the simplification of the application process, trying to remove as many barriers as possible for applicants, looking how to link eligibility to need, with the main focus around incorporating and complementing workforce and equity analysis and assistance with technical analysis and techno-economic work by our team. We've looked at also linking communities with communities and providing a space for communities with little lab presence for knowledge sharing and networking, and then directing direct connection to project funding, whether that's within ES4SE as well as beyond ES4SE. We had 64 applicants apply to the program, and excited to be working with 14 selected participants and communities from the East Coast to the West Coast, with diverse backgrounds and identities, some that intersect urban, rural, remote, islanded, Indigenous and tribal communities. Today with us, we have 3 communities joining us from Oneida Nation, Together New Orleans, and then Honor the Earth. Oftentimes in technical assistance, we see technology being the center and the focus of solutions within communities. Within energy storage for social equity, we wanted to focus on communities first and really center communities, looking at how benefits can flow to intended recipients within the communities, listening and learning what the community capacity and skill and job growth and goals that they're looking to achieve. And as I mentioned, knowledge sharing. The PNNL team looked at techno-economic analysis that includes microgrids, interconnected as well as islanded and off-grid systems, resilience hubs or lighthouses that Able will, you'll hear about shortly from Able with Together New Orleans, as well as PV and battery energy storage systems for commercial and residential buildings. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Able, Marie, and Victoria. Able, starting us off, sharing more about the work that Together New Orleans is doing within the NOLA communities. Marie Kills Warrior will share more about the workforce and economic development with clean energy technology in Indian country, as well as energy sovereignty for tribal nations in the US. Victoria will highlight infrastructure and coordination needs in Indian country. And then we'll wrap the speaker panel up with Marie sharing more about what seventh generation philosophy is before we open it up to Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to Able.
Thank you, Jen. So Together New Orleans, after Ida, began this strategy called Community Lighthouse, which is basically a strategy to equip our institutions with solar panels and backup battery storage so that they can be resiliency hubs after a major storm or power outage. You can go next slide. So Together New Orleans is really just a name for a network of community institutions such as churches, mosques, synagogues, civic associations, other nonprofits, and you see them here on this slide. It's about 54 member institutions of Together New Orleans. And after Ida hit in 2021, September of 2021 to be exact, I was a brand new organizer. I had been organizing with Together New Orleans for only a month, and I was kind of gaining in momentum and building relationships with the leaders of the organization and everything like that. And then Ida hits, and me and my colleagues are kind of at a loss. Like, what do we do now? It's like there's immediate needs that need to be addressed, but then there's also, what can we do as a state and city in Southeast Louisiana that goes through this time after time after time again, every hurricane season, and we still don't have a plan for resiliency, right? So it started off with just basically getting on a Zoom call with leaders from across the city and just checking on them, seeing how they're doing. Many of them were spread out from Houston to Atlanta to Birmingham, Alabama, but all of them were just really angry about first their inability to serve their community. Many of them are religious and faith-based institutions whose mission it is to serve their community in their time of need. And what's a bigger time of need in Southeast in the Gulf Coast than after a storm, right? But they just didn't have the capacity. They didn't have the churches didn't have electricity. Their congregations were spread all across the country, and they were just kind of impotent to serve the community. So we had several of those conversations, and through the course of those conversations, the conversation started turning from, why isn't our government, why isn't our disaster response agencies that are in our government not ready to respond to these disasters? It went from that spirit to more of like, what can we do? How can we be ready and do something different to allow us, equip us to respond to major disasters and power outages? Next slide. And the more we really dug into the immensity and the severity of long duration power outages, the more we realized that this is not an inconvenience. Not having power is not an inconvenience. It's a matter of life and death. I think it started with one of my colleagues who lost 3 family members to carbon monoxide poisoning, and we started researching like how many deaths are due to directly to power outages, and we learned that the power outages, long duration power outages, are the leading cause of death from disaster in the Gulf Coast. We had 19 of the 31 deaths after Hurricane Laura in 2020 was a result from long duration power outages. 246 in Texas after the Winter Storm Uri, and 30 of the 36 deaths in Louisiana after Hurricane Ida were due to power outages. 21 of 23 in New Orleans alone. So we quickly realized that that resiliency is not just a matter of convenience, but it's a matter of literally life and death. So next slide. So community lighthouse, like I said, is a community institution that is equipped with solar panels and big backup battery systems. And what you're seeing, looking at right now, is a picture of one of our first lighthouses in what's called the Broadmoor community at Broadmoor Community Church here in New Orleans. And during good times, the solar panels generate power from the sun and help defray those institutions' utility costs. And once they store the energy in the batteries, and in the event of a power outage, those batteries kick back on and immediately allow those institutions to be in operation to serve their community. Next slide. So what makes up a lighthouse? First is building a team. Building teams that are embedded within these congregations, within these organizations, that will commit themselves to manning the lighthouse, so to speak, when it's safe to do so after a storm and power outage. Those teams will claim their turf. This slide here is Bethlehem Lutheran Church, which is in the Central City neighborhood in New Orleans. Very predominantly Black, predominantly poor neighborhood in New Orleans. So they'll claim a turf. They'll mark off maybe a half mile around their church, and that's going to be their part of the city that they'll care for. And they'll go out and canvass the turf a few times a year, learn what people will need after a power outage, create a 24-hour list for folks that are maybe on power dependent medical devices, folks that need to be, folks that have mobility issues, folks that need to be attended to within the first day after a power outage. Next slide. And at these lighthouses, we will provide food and water, charging stations. There was a tornado that hit our neighboring parish last year, and we learned that just being able to communicate with your friends and families and access resources is huge after a power outage. And then also a portable battery exchange, where folks can take a little portable battery, charge their phones. Once that battery is drained, they can bring the battery back and get a full battery to keep their devices charged. And then, of course, cooling and heating centers to get some reprieve from the weather after a power outage. Next slide. Our full-scale implementation plan is 86 locations around New Orleans. This assures that nobody will live outside a half a mile from a lighthouse. Next slide. And this strategy is really taking off. We've really had a lot of support from philanthropic organizations and government officials. Just to highlight one of them, Congressman Troy Carter, who is our U.S. Congressman here, allocated $3.8 million in community project funding in the 2023 federal budget, which was the largest allocation in the federal budget for a solar project in the country. We beat out Nancy Pelosi. She was right under us in the largest federal budget allocation. So this allowed us to, next slide. this allowed us to expand and begin our first phase of this project, which is 16 community lighthouses throughout the city. And we were very strategic in how we chose those 16 based on the social vulnerability index, how many folks on average are able to leave and how many folks are not forced to stay or forced to stay after a storm. So we have our first 16 that will be completed hopefully by the end of the year. We hope to have maybe 6 to 8 completed by hurricane season, so by about August, July, August. And then in addition to that, next slide, we plan to build out 8 lighthouses in other parts of the states, but we also want to implement that same full-scale plan throughout the state so that nobody is outside of a 15-minute walk in the city or a 15-minute drive in rural areas from a lighthouse. Next slide. And last but not least, I'm very proud and happy to announce that last month we had our first 2 lighthouses completely completed and operational at Bethlehem Lutheran Church and Broadmoor Church, Broadmoor Community Church. And through the work with PNNL, we've kind of been able to understand the regulatory structure here in New Orleans to be able to fund lighthouses, 86 lighthouse implementations. So we'll be continuing to work on that throughout the next few years. And thank you. I thank y'all. And that concludes.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much, Abel. Appreciate you sharing more about the work that Together New Orleans is doing. We're going to transition from the Together New Orleans and Abel to Marie Kills Warrior with Honor the Earth and Eighth Fire Solar.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marie Kills Warrior. And so with our project, we are up here focusing on the Pine Point School, which is located on the White Earth Reservation. And I guess it's one thing that we're wanting to create within this community, and hopefully it's going to, be the first and it's the start of the ripple effect, is creating a resiliency hub for people that are inside the community, and where we would like for this project to lead and to be replicated not only throughout the reservation, but also throughout the entire United States. Next slide, please. So we really wanted to go by and stay alongside with Pine Point School's mission, is that with the school, it being a K-8 school, and we really wanted the students to understand of the process that is going to be happening. And we wanted to get them involved at an early stage with what solar PV energy is and what it does. So we wanted to first begin by showing them the solar suitcases and actually getting them a little bit of some hands-on and letting them know like this is a small suitcase now, but if you take a look in the background, that is kind of the first 21 kilowatt system. And so we kind of want to keep replicating that same process throughout this entirety of the project and letting the students know like this is going to get, bigger and what it can do. Next slide, please. And another thing about the Pine Point School is that it also has a community's elderly center attached on the west side of the building. And it is actually used on day-to-day for the food to be delivered and prepared for elders within the community. And a lot of people, a lot of the kids actually, rely on the school for the food during the school year. And we also wanted to recognize that a lot of these students come from economically disadvantaged families. And we wanted to give them, a reason to prosper and to let them know that there are other ways out there that we can implement more renewable energy beginning at the early stage of a child's life. Next slide, please. And another thing that we wanted to incorporate is along in with the STEM program that the school has implemented is the Good Life program. And of course, with the Anishinaabe Ojibwe people, they are very STEM beside their cultural beliefs and their traditions. And wanting to incorporate environmental sustainability inside and alongside those beliefs and those facts in order for them to continue and to adopt this new technology and align it with our cultural beliefs. And of course, always wanting to take into consideration of the environmental effects once these renewable technology resources are implemented. And so that way Native youth can continue to learning their traditional teachings along with incorporating a modern technology and aligning it with those teachings. Next slide, please. So one of our first step was to identify some of the challenges and barriers that are going to come into being along with this project. So one of them was learning that the current PV system that is there has not ever been interconnected to the grid due because the system was undersized. And we also had to look into why it was never interconnected. One, it being small and with some of the charges that come along with the interconnection process, it was kind of deemed, how do you say, unsuitable. They kind of just said it straight out that it was not worth it and would only probably offset about maybe up to 5% the overall electricity bill of the school itself. And we realized that we don't really have a workforce within the community itself. And we also needed to learn how to collaborate and work together with a couple of the different electrical cooperatives that are going to be utilized throughout this project. And we also don't have a lot of electricians on the reservation. So definitely wanting to get people the experience needed to continue or to move towards the path going to obtaining their journeyman's and becoming a certified electrician that can be utilized throughout the reservation. And next slide, please. And so so one thing about the school is that is an all electric building. And whenever we took a look at their electricity bills, they were over at least 600,000 kilowatt hours from March of 2021 to March of 2022. And they averaged a total of about spending $80,000 in the utility bill alone. And we are going to have to work with two other cooperatives. One is for the interconnection process. Then looking through our designs, then we're going to have to go through them for transformer upgrades and for them to give us the green light and the permitting, acquiring the permit. And another one is because our system is going to be over 40 kilowatts. We're going to have to be working with Great River Energy on the rates and purchasing. And so we kind of was going through a couple of different solutions and trying to look into what else we can do to help get the community prepared for these types of projects. So we was looking into doing an off-grid solar system and kind of giving people the opportunity to get ready to enter to the field by actually providing some hands-on training with an off-grid system. Because one, it's really hard for a lot of people to get electricity to their home. I believe one thing that comes along with that process is a 2-year waiting list, along with about $8,000 in cost in order for a line to be transferred to their home if they are not by a existing utility line already. And of course, definitely wanting to educate more people on the advantages of what renewable energy can do, especially in terms of solar PV with battery backup. And we also wanted to create the opportunity for employment. So with Pine Point, there's about a total of 10 to 12 jobs that are around in the community itself. And a lot of people, they rely on governmental assistance and live below low to low medium income level is about maybe 50% that do. And we also wanted to incorporate more energy sovereignty. Like we have the land, and once we develop the workforce, we'll be able to deploy more of these types of systems throughout the reservation. And of course, keeping collaboration with the community committee of Pine Point along with these school board, and letting them know that what it is that we're doing and how we would like to continue to collaborate throughout the fruition of this project. Next slide, please. And so this is kind of just an aerial view of the Pine Point community. And it's, as you can see, it's relatively small. And I believe within the radius of this community, it's about 325 people that make up the Pine Point community alone. And also about 9,500 people make up the White Earth Reservation as well. And so we wanted to go with over there by the baseball field. We're actually wanting to move that in the opposite direction. And close to the baseball field, you'll see the existing 21 PV system. So we are basically wanting to implement our first system right there at that point, and then creating a battery backup system, because one, the Pine Point School is within walking distance where community members are able to go to in case of a tornado or another natural disaster. And there's a lot of people that rely on electricity because of their medical devices. And a lot of these homes, they use propane as their way of heating and cooking. So whenever the lights go off, then they would usually turn on the propane heater or the oven just to keep warm. And the community has to make a choice between heat or eat during the heating seasons of the year, which of course can relate to more health precautions, and definitely wanting to let people know that they would have a safe place to go in terms of natural disasters, and along with the other advantages that this project can continue to bring once we hit the ground running with it. Next slide, please. And so that is just the overall of our project going forward. And thank you guys very much, and to PNNL and ES4C, everybody on the call, and Miigwech.
Awesome. Thank you, Marie, for sharing more about the work happening at White Earth Nation and at Pine Point School. I loved what you talked about regarding, connecting environmental sustainability and really keeping the traditions and culture in alignment as you're looking also with technology solutions, and highlighting the intersection and vulnerabilities beyond just energy, but food security and health and wellness. So with that, we're going to transition over to Victoria Flowers, who will share more about infrastructure and coordination needs in Indian country.
Julie, thank you, and I appreciate this opportunity. And I would like to also state that PNNL was a great asset to the United Nations when we were putting together an energy grant for FEMA, and they help assisted with identifying how we can conduct better outreach, how we can navigate sort of the legal landscape, as well as the regulations and the grant requirements. So I just would like to actually put out, a plug for PNNL and their technical assistance. One of the things that I wanted to address was, as we started going through our energy resilience project, one of the things we identified that was very hard to wrap our head around is what is our vulnerability when it comes to critical tribal infrastructure. Of course, there's vulnerability to natural disasters, and for us, the Oneida Nation is located in northeastern Wisconsin. Our biggest challenges are windstorms, tornadoes, and heavy snowfall. But then the other thing is contractor availability, particularly if we have a big windstorm and there's a lot of utilities that need fixing. Oftentimes we aren't first on the list. Usually it's the bigger communities that tend to get those resources first. Some of the unique challenges that we've identified in developing our project was the land status and how that affects how we might actually approach a project. In Indian country, there is a variety of different types of land statuses that include fee land, which is taxable land that's not held in trust. It can be owned by a tribe or owned by an individual. There's trust land, which can be individual trust land, which is owned by an individual and not necessarily controlled by the tribe. Trust land that's owned by the tribe, and depending on how the tribe is structured, when land is in trust, if you want to do projects on them, if you don't have the authorities conveyed to you from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, all projects go through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we find that that has been a relatively difficult hurdle for some folks to move projects forward. State public service commissions also present some unique challenges because we don't have a seat at the table, and we're largely governed by how the state of Wisconsin decides to distribute its energy. Transmission and distribution systems are another challenge that we face because we don't own them. And so we're subject to what the utility companies, what those owners of those pieces of utility, where they put them and how we have access to them. In many places in Indian country, some of that infrastructure is very old and oftentimes subject to a lot of extremes in weather, and extreme demand loads also can be a problem. I stated above contractor availability, but that's also true in Indian country. So when we have the opportunity to work with other Indian-owned companies, particularly solar companies, that helps us to kind of alleviate some of that. But then to the point that Marie had made earlier, is to actually train our own job force to be able to work on these systems. One of the big challenges we have in the Oneida Nation, we're a largely urban tribe, is the tribal land use designation and neighboring governments. There are several governments within the reservation boundaries that have actually sought to disestablish the Oneida Nation, which makes an investment in critical infrastructure particularly challenging, because when we have to go through the NEPA process, if we're getting federal funding and we receive public comments, we have to address those public comments. And oftentimes those public comments are directed at the fact that some of the neighboring communities consider that the Oneida Nation was disestablished, which it never was. Next slide, please. One of the other big challenges in Indian country and in just generally rural and remote locations is for the contractors to understand the local conditions. I took this picture shortly after we had a snowstorm this year where I'm presently located. We had a total of 18 feet of snow, which makes kind of maintaining and operating some of these systems a little difficult. You can see on the bottom left-hand side a solar array panel that's covered with snow. Well, obviously it's not going to be doing much good work there, but this is an example of a contractor that came up to northern Wisconsin from down south and placed a solar array at an inappropriate angle that didn't allow for the snow to slide off. So understanding those local conditions is critically important when we start thinking about if we're going to put up a solar panel. You noticed in Marie's presentation that her solar array, her PV array, did have fencing around it, and oftentimes that's necessary to prevent deer from going in and troubling the PV panels. Understanding, those unique local conditions is really important in putting up a successful project. Next slide, please. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Oneida Nation. The Oneida Reservation is 65,400 acres, and the tribe owns approximately 48% of that. And half of that land is held in trust status. So what that means for us, and because we're what's called a compacted tribe, when we hold land in trust, that's our strongest authority. When it's in fee, oftentimes we have challenges with local governments and the inability to actually control what happens with our land. As stated before, there are several municipalities within the Oneida Reservation. There are 5 of them, and those present unique challenges to rights of way that might be needed in order to put in utility easements or to run service line agreements. So navigating those different jurisdictional challenges can really lengthen the time it takes to fully implement a project. On top of the 5 municipalities, there are 2 county governments and 2 major utility providers that have merged. So those are, they have a big footprint on the reservation. So it makes it very difficult for us to negotiate pricing, which is largely controlled by the Public Service Commission. And as I stated earlier, some of the legal challenges that the Oneida Nation faces as a result of the presence of those municipalities and county governments within the Oneida Nation. I don't really have much more to say about it, but I wanted to highlight some of the unique challenges that I've observed as we were starting to try to apply for a grant and navigate these different situations. So I have nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for sharing more about the infrastructure needs with Oneida Nation, and also highlighting some of the challenges, right, as new technology and or existing technology is implemented and from within different environments and not necessarily knowing the environmental conditions. So thank you for highlighting that. We're going to turn it back over to Marie Kills Warrior and transition to video. Marie will be sharing about the 7th generation philosophy with us, and then we'll transition to Q&A. So
thank you, Jen. So one of the things that has always been taught, like every single Native American culture, is the talk or the topic of these 7 generations. So a lot of people kind of don't really understand what that means or what it is, but it's basically a philosophy and rooted in that the decisions that we make today, how are they going to affect the generations that come down the road? So right now we want to invest and we want to deploy more renewable energy resources throughout the United States, in our reservation, and in our communities. And as I had mentioned before in our slide, is that one, getting the kids involved and help them to get just this understanding to start of what renewable energy looks like. It could be wind, it could be hydro, it could be solar, and definitely wanting them to be introduced to those at an early development stage in their life, because one, I believe we are now into that 7th generation right now. So definitely, as more Native American communities and people of color are beginning to deploy more of these renewable energy resources, it's going to get a lot of pushbacks from the people that make a lot of money that come from utility companies, oil, gas pipelines, oil pipelines, and how they're kind of not really leaving much left for the generations that are going to be coming after us. So that's kind of where, like, I have been enrooted since I started my career, is wanting to share my knowledge, even with people that don't really understand the advantages of solar PV and what it can do and what it can bring. To me, it aligns with my culture and with my beliefs, and how it can help my people and how it can help sustain the environment, the world, for the ones that are coming into the world and those who are coming after. And I believe that's kind of where everybody is headed, and that's where everybody needs to be. Everybody needs to understand and acknowledge that this transition has been talked about for the past centuries about how we're going to need to preserve the earth today and respect the environment for the ones that are getting ready to come after us, and they're going to be the next caretakers of this earth. For how we leave it behind is going to affect how they're going to take care of it, and the challenges that they're going to be facing if we don't do something today, right now. So that's where I am with that. And I didn't know if Victoria wanted to add anything onto the seventh generation philosophy or topic.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, I think you very eloquently put it that it's for now and the next 7 generations. And if we can move forward with that philosophy, when we start thinking about energy generation, energy resiliency, and to your point that you made earlier, Marie, is tribal sovereignty and, having control of, having tribes have control of their own destiny, not merely being subject to the whims of a state public service commission or of a local community government or of a major utility. The point that you make is that we're facing a lot of headwinds, and there is funding out by the Department of Energy to make these type of projects more available to tribes. And we don't have a say in Congress. We don't have any congressional representation to see where that money goes. So it's up to tribes to carry forward, and just remember, it's now in the next 7 generations. So with that, I have nothing else. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Marie and Victoria, for sharing about the 7th generation philosophy and really the importance of the work that we're all doing now, and those on the call, and really the impact it's going to have not just for the next generation, but the 7 generations ahead, and really what we leave behind currently. With that, I'm going to invite our speakers to jump back on camera as we transition to Q&A. Abel, great to see you. Victoria and Marie. Let's see, I know there's a couple, we have some amazing folks on our team on the back end navigating questions that are coming in, but just kind of teeing us off with some of the conversations that we've had in preparations for our panel today, reflecting on the intersections of challenges and really the need for trusted partnerships. I think, Victoria, you mentioned not having representation in Congress from a tribal perspective, and the decision-making authority that happens, right? So we need, and communities need partners and partnerships in helping achieve and partnering with moving toward community goals. Can you folks share, what trusted and healthy partnership looks like with your communities? Maybe Abel, if you want to first, and then Victoria and Marie.
Yes, I can speak for here and with Together New Orleans. We really prioritize building those relationships and cultivating trust within our member institutions. This project really was a groundswell from our leaders in our communities in New Orleans, and having 54 community-based institutions really gives us a connection to folks that we need to build partnerships with folks in government. I remember one of our leaders, Reverend Gregory Manning, who was a pastor at Broadmoor Community Church. After Ida, he was actually on the phone with Congressman Carter, United States Congressman Carter, and just kind of already starting to put together, planning for having conversations on what to do about resiliency. So I think the trust within our member institutions and in the standing that they have in the community has really allowed us to build healthy relationships with not only our elected officials, but then also our utility company, Entergy New Orleans.
Thank you, Abel. When we talk about trust in Indian country, it's built on really strong connections and relationships, and earning that trust and giving that trust back is critically important in Indian country. We're very lucky here up in the Midwest. We've got the Midwest Tribal Renewable Energy Association called Minterra, which all the 36 tribes in Region 5 are able to participate in. And with that group, we've found trusted partners to be able to bounce ideas off, find people who are contractors. So for us, that's been really helpful. That's how we've developed a sense of trust. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but PNNL and the technical assistance that the National Laboratories has given has been very helpful. And I think there's been a real concerted effort in disadvantaged communities and in Indian country to reach out and really try to become that trusted partner as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. It's been really an honor and pleasure working with the three of you and all 14 communities within the program. Marie, how about you?
Yeah, so definitely piggyback off of Abel and Victoria. One is that a lot of Native nations, so for us as an example with the Pine Point School, is that they understood what solar PV was, but they weren't really aware of like what it can do. So definitely giving them kind of simplifying the process and a lot of communication went inside with this project moving forward. One is telling the Pine Point School what is going to be happening and let them know the different sizes and the different scenarios that PNNL had put together for us and what aligned and what is going to meet their days in terms of days of resiliency. And definitely keeping the community in mind as well, because they don't know what is going to be going on, and talking with the community committee and telling and letting them know, like, this is what we have, this is what we have been doing, and we want to implement this here in the community because we know like there's a need for jobs, and there's just a lot of opportunities that can arise with this, but also taking it to the tribal level and wanting to continuing partnering with the tribe and the tribal council and incorporating this work and alongside with the other work that they're going to be doing, and also being transparent about any challenges or barriers that happen to come up during this process. And also kind of a little bit of networking as well, because we're also connected with a 10 Power out of California. And now we have Solar Bear Native Son, Bob Blake's crew that is now joining us as we move forward to incorporate this project along with his project. And so it's a lot of clear communication, transparency to hold us, to keep us interconnected and just to be able to have these conversations that come up. And yeah, just to keep moving forward, and that all of our goals align with each other, and that we're hoping for the same outcome for this project and for the other ones.
Great. Thank you, Marie, for sharing more and highlighting the workforce development and also the importance of educating youth at a younger age. We do have a question that has come in, and this might be more toward for Marie regarding some of the examples you've shared on the heating. side with White Earth Nation. So a question that came in is, are electric powered heat pumps a feasible option for Pine Point residences? Replacing propane heating fuels is very challenging.
Yeah, so we have, talked about that in replacing, the propane tanks. And a lot of the homes, unfortunately, are 60-year-old HUD homes. And I guess what it all really comes down to is because they're renting the homes is that it all depends on how much cash that the tribe has to spare to replace these homes. So which is why we're also looking into um more grants that are some more funding opportunities that are available out there that we can help hopefully to help these residents to apply for to replace some of their old and inefficient appliances to more Energy Star rated appliances and helping them on that level. So it has been talked about, and that is still a conversation that we are having.
Great, thank you, Marie. We have another question that has come in, and this is for all three panelists. And this is from Milan. While I understand that a lot of the ground level work, there's curiosity in what you folks think about the role of technology, especially around data storage and analytics in decision making and planning. Are there efforts going in acquiring the data or acquiring the resources to gather data?
That's a really salient point. And I think one of the things that really hampers the communities that each of us represent is the ability to transmit data, right? Just the broadband connectivity thing is a huge, huge, huge challenge that I know I'm sure all of our respective communities are trying to get through. But then in acquiring data, right? So you can get data from power companies and electrical bills and that type of thing. But sometimes I think, and this is just simply my experience in Indian country, there's a fear of sharing data because data is power, and that power can be used against you. And I think that's some of the things that we've experienced in our community. I think I'm a data nerd, so I love data, but sharing that widely and being able to effectively collect it is sometimes the challenge. And that's where connections within the community are really important, and to hold that trust sacred with the community members.
And so for us with our project is that we have to, whenever you talk about, like the tech side of things, so it gets really, really cold up here in Minnesota. We're gonna have to really literally sit down and read the manuals out of each technology. So for example, for our battery, we're gonna have to ensure that they're able to withstand at least a negative 20 Fahrenheit degree constant. And so a lot of the data with like Victoria's mentioning is that, so we actually have to go and use some of the tools that are available out there to get the data that's going to be used in applying for some of the opportunities. So looking at the LMI, the employment level, and looking at the land that it's on, and getting statistics about how many students are in the school, how many teachers are teaching, what's the student to teacher ratio, and like where do these students come from. So all of that data is something that we have looked into and that we are utilizing moving forward. And I hope that answers your questions.
I think for us, it's two parts. One, in planning where these locations or these resiliency hubs are going to be prioritized. We're using census tract data, social vulnerability index to make sure that we are not kind of one of the earliest challenges that we had. Let me take it back. It was like figuring out how we're going to get this funded, right? And the last thing we wanted to do was for our more richer, wider institutions to be able to get a lighthouse first, because they're able to raise the funds for themselves. And that's why we raise public and philanthropic funds, rather than having the institutions themselves raise the funds. And we really use census tract data to plan what our first phase is going to look like, where everything's going to be located. But then, and this is the part that's exciting to me, because I'm not a data wonk, and I'm not an energy aficionado by any means. So breaking down all this information, and PNNL has been good. We have a partnership with a guy named Pierre Moses from 127 Energy, who's really helped us break down all this data and tell a story with it. Tell a story of how much these institutions are able to defray their utility costs. Tell a story of how over time, how much emissions and carbon is being avoided by getting their power primarily from solar. So being able to take all this data and everything that we've learned, and then we're introducing this technology to communities though who have not had had access to this technology. So really breaking it down, telling that story in a way that's accessible to our communities has been a big focal point of our work.
Thank you, Abel, Marie, and Victoria, for sharing your thoughts on that question. And the common thread that I heard is really, it comes down to trust and relationships in gathering that data and sharing that data. So thank you again for responding to that. We have another question that came in from Juliet. And so that comment question is, we sometimes do training for public service commissions or public utility commissions, and are interested in how to make sure more voices are heard in the PUC proceedings. Can the panelists talk about whether you've been in touch with your local public service commission or public utility commission, and what your experiences have been? And do you feel like your voice is being heard? And do you have any suggestions that you can share with us about this?
This is Vicki. One of the things that I can share, for the very first time, the Wisconsin Public Service Commission held a tribal leaders meeting, and my chairman brought me with him, as well as some of our other folks. So that was the first time. And I think sometimes with the Public Service Commission or public utility commissions, it really depends on the relationship the state has with, in my case and Marie's case, what kind of relationship they have with the tribe, right? Do they view the tribe as a partner? And for disadvantaged communities, is your state government actually paying attention to those communities? And I think we all know so much of this depends on the political winds that blow. But we need to take it out of the personalities, right? It's got to be about principles, energy for everybody, and it's important, and it needs to be fair and equitable to everybody. Because when it's not, all it does is exacerbates those differences between us and makes people plant their flag just a little bit deeper in the ground and say, I'm not budging and I'm not going to work with you because you didn't work with me. So, I think it's education is the key, and trust.
Absolutely. In New Orleans, we are fortunate in that our utility system is regulated locally by our city council. And right before Ida, we had an election for city council, and a really progressive, kind of forward-thinking city council was put into office. We have really been able to work with them through this process. We have lighthouses in all their districts, and they've been super excited and supportive in that. We have intervened in a docket, which is kind of just a formal decision-making process of how rules will be made around utilities, how investments will be made. So we've really been able to get the ear of the council members and the regulatory bodies under the council to allow us to intervene into that docket process to get funding for our full-scale implementation. On the state level, on the Public Service Commission level, the rest of the state is regulated by our Public Service Commission. So it was really just educating, and that's what education comes in, Victoria, for us, is like really educating our leaders around the politics, around the Public Service Commission. We just had an election, and as a nonpartisan organization, it was very easy to kind of educate people and how to vote without telling them how to vote, you know, because a lot of people didn't know about the Public Service Commission. So just presenting them with how much power the Public Service Commission has around our everyday lives really generate a lot of energy, and we're working on those kind of political dynamics to get the same implementation throughout the state as well.
And so for the wider, rather for the wider nation, I believe they have just established a tribal public utilities commission, and we definitely would like to, you know, part with them a little bit more moving forward. But they have also talked about other projects, you know, throughout the reservation, you know, with implementing solar PV and creating a workforce in the different areas throughout the reservation. So we feel like with the tribal PUC, they have heard us and we have heard them, and but as far as it goes onto the state side, I believe we still kind of have a little bit of work there, because one, we have wanted to go for what's called, you know, the Solar for Schools program. But unfortunately, after we had run some tests through our design software, the PV limit that they had capped was at 40 kilowatts. And unfortunately, that if we decided to go ahead and pursue those funds for the 40 kW, it would have been inefficient. It would have been more time consuming, because we already have a 21 kilowatt system, which only offsets 5% of the school's electricity bill. Adding an additional 40 would probably make it up to maybe 15 to 20%. And then to expand on those existing systems, we would have to go through everything twice. We have to go through our interconnection process twice. We would have to go to the purchasing and the utility rates again twice. And then we would have to change our design and our transformers and redo all the groundwork. So definitely talking to more on the state level of wanting to expand that cap for rural and remote communities that are outside the Twin Cities area, in order for us to actually use those funds and utilize them to an extent to where we can literally see the savings up front, and that it's not going to cause us to have to redo everything twice. The same process, but we just have to do it twice. So I guess our next step is to continue moving forward and letting them know, like, we are here, like this is what we want to use it, but unfortunately we can't. And so just keep reiterating on what it is that we want to do and what it is that we want to accomplish. So again, conversations are still being had in terms of all of the tribes that are within the state of Minnesota.
Thank you, Marie, Abel, and Victoria, for sharing more in regards to Juliet's question. Juliet's also with PNNL and leads quite a bit of state and can work with GMLC and TA program. Thank you, Juliet, for the question. I know we're slightly over the hour, and really appreciate everyone calling in and joining our community leaders from the ES4SC program. Round of applause for Abel, Victoria, and Marie. Thank you for your time and sharing the leadership and amazing work you folks are doing within your communities and across the country. With that, I would say huge thank you, and Plug for upcoming webinars, May 25th. We will be looking at the future of flow batteries with Vince Sprinkle, and then later in June, transitioning to electric fleets with Christine Holland on the transportation side. So again, thank you again, much gratitude, and it's an honor partnering with Able, Victoria, and Marie and your folks' communities within ES4SE, and really value the time and sharing the knowledge with those in attendance today. So thank you and appreciate everyone who has called in. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you.